Hi, welcome back, everybody. I'm Debbie Cox-Bolton, CEO of the New Deal. I hope you enjoyed this morning's breakout sessions, and I'm so glad you're going to join us today for our closing plenary of our 10th Annual Leaders Conference. Over the past 3 days, we've talked about many of the big challenges that we're confronting as a nation. Yesterday, we heard from Dr. Lena Wen about the seriousness of this new phase of the coronavirus and the need to redouble our efforts to stop the spread. Former Education Secretary John King and Amanda Edwards talked about how to address racial inequities that have existed for far too long in too many areas. Oregon State Treasurer Tobias Reed, Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley, and Blue Meridian partners Laurel Blatchford discussed the hard work needed to shore up the social safety net, including investments in housing and childcare and more. And breakout sessions allowed us to take deeper dives into critical issues to rebuild an America that works better for everyone. Today, we'll be tackling 3 more important topics: how to build resiliency in the face of climate change and increasing extreme weather events, how to continue to expand access to voting and safeguard our elections going forward, and what lessons Democrats need to take away from 2020 about how we can broaden our coalition and expand the map. While the challenges we've been discussing are daunting, our time together is actually filling me with a lot of hope about our future and our ability to meet this moment. We've heard about great ideas working at the state and local levels. And with the Biden-Harris incoming administration, we'll have partners in the White House who will work hand in hand with state and local leaders to solve problems and build back better. We start today with a few remarks from a very special guest who knows something about the progress that can be made at the state level, longtime friend and vice chair of the New Deal, Colorado Governor Jared Polis. We've been lucky to work with the governor since his days in Congress, when he was co-chairing the New Democrat Coalition's Future of Work Task Force. Since being elected governor in 2018, he's done so much important work, from passing universal kindergarten, comprehensive healthcare reform, and an ambitious climate action plan. We're so grateful for him being here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Jared Polis.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and I want to thank Helen Milby as well. And thanks, everybody. It's great work that you are doing at New Deal to foster this innovative network of state and local leaders. And I'm proud to be an honorary vice chair, and I am very supportive of the progress we're seeing across the country. As you mentioned, I've been supporter of New Deal since I was elected to Congress in 2008. I'm also very excited to help kick off the closing plenary session of the New Deal 10th Annual Leaders Conference. I've attended New Deal's conferences in person in San Francisco and Washington, and smaller ones we've had in Colorado. And as you know, state and local leaders are on the front lines of addressing our country's most pressing issues, even more so during a national, global, in fact, pandemic. And especially with the lack of federal leadership, we've all had to step up, municipal level, state level. We just finished a special session of our state legislature on issue after issue, on the pandemic, on expanding healthcare, on protecting our environment, really pushing boundaries and showing how we can't afford to wait, and we're going to roll up our sleeves and get to work. My main focus in Colorado, really fourfold: expanding access to early childhood education, lowering the cost of healthcare for Coloradans, moving Colorado to 100% renewable energy by 2040, and reducing the tax burden on folks. And these are, issues that people care about across our entire state. They're kitchen table issues. By doing everything we can to improve our schools and make sure people can save money on healthcare, we can really build a Colorado for all, where everybody can achieve, and we have a similar goal nationally in a America for all. We now have full day kindergarten in Colorado. We used to have half day. Voters approved our preschool initiative with 67% of the vote last year. That's hard to imagine. I mean, that's, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, you name it, 67% voted for our universal preschool program, which will now has been endorsed by the people and will start. But obviously, there's one thing that above all has been in all of our minds as elected officials the last few months. We've all learned different terms like, R not and all of these different things, and that is the pandemic. And we have seen a void of federal leadership. Hopefully, we have taken that burden upon ourselves at every level, as role models, as soapbox, from policy. We fought to get supplies to our healthcare professionals. We've stood up testing programs operationally, municipal, county, state. We're implementing and spreading the very best science-based health advice. And now, just recently, we worked with our state legislature to put together a bipartisan aid package in Colorado, $105 million in tax relief and direct assistance to small businesses like restaurants, help for housing and utility, for rent, for heating over winter, support for childcare, especially with schools being in and out, support for broadband, and for food pantries. And we also did a one-time UI payment of $375, which Coloradans received to experience unemployment. We know the vaccine is almost here, but now's the time to buckle down. Just when people are tired and itching, we know we need to wear masks, avoid others, not socialize outside our home. And especially as we undertake a national transition with the Trump administration coming to an end and the Biden administration beginning, I have no doubt that the work of state and local leaders will be more important than ever before, hopefully working in closer tandem with the new administration. It's really an opportunity for us to focus on creative solutions to every problem we face: the health side of the epidemic, the economic aftermath, reducing the severity and duration of the global recession and its impact in our areas. And I'm grateful for this network, networks like this where we can come together, share ideas, make life better for our fellow Americans. We're stronger when we work together, and that is true at every level. And now I want to thank you, and I want to turn it over to for a special announcement from Andrea McClellan.
Greetings from Norfolk, Virginia, home to the world's largest naval base and one of the busiest seaports on the East Coast, and second only to New Orleans in terms of flood risk. In Norfolk, Virginia, climate change isn't a future issue. We are feeling its effects daily. I'm Andrea McClellan, and I'm a Norfolk City Council member, and I'm a proud New Deal leader. Last year, I had the honor of co-chairing our New Deal leader climate change policy work group alongside Wisconsin Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. Over the course of the year, our progressive, pro-growth leaders from around the country worked with the nation's top experts to discuss climate policies. We brought our own climate action plans and created innovative solutions to address the climate crisis. We put that into a comprehensive report called our Climate Solutions Report that I'm proud to say that we debuted at the Democratic National Convention earlier this year. In this report, we provide practical guidance for state and local leaders to address the pressing issues in their communities, focused on 3 areas: reducing emissions, building resilience, and creating ways to implement those policy changes. Amongst our recommendations, we call for 100% clean electricity, an ambitious plan to retrofit and electrify buildings, stronger fuel efficiency standards that calls for no emissions for new trucks, and a return to Obama-era standards of 54 miles to the gallon by 2025, carbon pricing, ending subsidies for fossil fuel companies, new innovative zoning laws for flood-prone areas like Norfolk, Virginia, resiliency-focused infrastructure banks, and more innovative financing, more green space, and most importantly, raising environmental justice as a cornerstone when we are talking about climate change. I'm looking forward to working with my fellow New Deal leaders across the country over the course of the next year to implement these innovative solutions in the policy paper, as well to advocate for these policies with the new Biden administration and Congress so that we can all build back better for a more resilient nation for this and future generations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Josh Freed, Senior Vice President for Climate and Energy at Third Way, a national think tank focused on advancing center-left solutions to many of the major challenges facing our country. I'm deeply appreciative of New Deal's invitation for me to moderate this panel and to hear from our excellent panelists today. And this virtual conversation comes at an extremely important time. 2020 may go down as the most challenging year for the United States since 1932. The pandemic, severe recession, unemployment and mounting food and financial insecurity, uprising over racial inequities, climate change. Many of you have had to manage up close the climate-enhanced wildfires and record heat, hurricanes, flooding, or other previously once in 100-year events that are now every year. Help is around the corner. Not only do we have multiple vaccines being evaluated by the FDA to finally bring the pandemic under control, but Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are poised on January 20th, 2021 to bring needed leadership, experience, and trust in science and expertise back to the federal government. A key from Third Way's perspective as we move into this is expectation setting. We are not going to get a Green New Deal, a carbon price, or comprehensive climate legislation necessarily in the next Congress. But as you all know, climate change is now impacting most parts of our economy and our lives, including the extreme weather events and daily disruptions from sunny day flooding, shifting growing seasons and persistent drought, as well as crumbling water infrastructure and pollution that disproportionately impacts communities of color. And the pre-pandemic public health crisis caused by this pollution has only made COVID-19 more devastating for these underserved populations. These are issues that we can and should address in 2021 with competent, empathetic government, focused on helping people, and either a little or big nudge on Republicans in Congress to act. Led by the Biden administration, this could include long overdue investments in clean infrastructure, including roads, bridges, electrification of our transportation system, and modernization of our water system. Investments in innovation, including in hydrogen and carbon capture, clean aviation, and even advanced nuclear, which could also bring funding and jobs to parts of the country and universities that have long been ignored by R&D dollars. Government procurement to help spur purchasing from U.S. businesses in manufacturing and making clean technologies more affordable and accessible. And as many of you are experiencing now, the need for funding for cities and states to rescue critical services, including mass transit, from the current financial crisis and help invest more in local infrastructure and resilience. And even without congressional action, we expect to see climate change treated not as a niche issue, not as something to be ignored or denied, but as a crisis that, like the pandemic, requires a whole of government response, one that is intertwined with ensuring equity and creating jobs and economic opportunities for all Americans, including those in cities and rural areas too often ignored. Now, that is a lot, but it still leaves much unanswered about how we communicate about climate change, what mix of policies we can expect to see next year out of Washington, and how we may be able to bridge the partisan and geographic divides that seem to be overwhelming our country right now. Fortunately, with me today are three excellent panelists to discuss these issues. We have Bernadette Woods-Placky, the Chief Meteorologist and Climate Matters Director at Climate Central, former United States Senator Mary Landrieu, and Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes of Wisconsin. Very excited to get to our panel and hear opening remarks from each of them based on a question that I'll pose to them, and then we'll have some time for discussion. So let's just jump right in because we only have a short period of time for a really important and in-depth conversation. And we'll start with Bernadette. We've had a record number of hurricanes this season, enormous wildfires, record heat. And as a meteorologist, can you talk a little bit about the connection of climate change and these extreme weather events? And what do recent trends tell us about what we should expect in the years to come?
Well, hello, and thanks for having me today. As COVID is on full display this year, so is climate change. And we're seeing that primarily in the form of extreme weather. I mean, there's many different ways we experience climate change, but extreme weather is the way that really smacks you across the face and forces people to rethink systems. You know, we're going to take you through a couple of different types of extreme weather and make the connections here. One of the most obvious is the increase in extreme heat. And that plays out in so many different ways. These longer, stronger heat waves are changing our economies and how we plan for that, with opening cooling centers and the impact on infrastructure. It's taking a huge toll on health, from the direct links to heat to the effect on outdoor workers, to the air pollution issues that cascade out of it, and even down to our littlest people and the camps they go to and the sports that they play. We're also seeing that climate change is amplifying and supercharging our water cycle. And how that plays out is that we've got this globe that's mainly water, and it's creating more evaporation. So where there's a drought, it's intensifying, But where we have a trigger for some of that water, it's coming down in bigger flood events that are overwhelming infrastructure systems and taking a big toll on our farming and in our city life here too. Another thing, hurricanes, been a big story of 2020. We know that a lot of our extra heat is going into the oceans. And you might not even know, but it's over 90% of the extra heat coming into our climate system goes into the oceans. And that's where these hurricanes get their fuel. So when you have warmer water, we're getting bigger, stronger hurricanes that are even intensifying faster. So we don't have enough time to prepare for them to make landfall. And then when they do make landfall, they're coming with more rain and a higher storm surge because of sea level rise. Wildfires, another big story on the forefront this year. And it's not necessarily that climate change is causing these wildfires, but we know that climate change is making them worse. It's setting the stage for bigger, stronger, more explosive wildfires. And we are seeing that on full display. And the thing is, this is not a future issue. It's already here and now. And the impacts of it are only accelerating. And they're really affecting the people, the places, and the things that we love most. And the thing that I don't think people fully always connect to is it's not just the extremes, but our everyday weather is changing and slowly eroding at some of our systems. We're seeing this from shifting seasons that prolong the amount of time we're spending with pollen, that we're spending with mosquitoes, how we're seeing our fish migrate and our birds migrate in different ways. We're also seeing that these little changes take a huge impact on our food systems, what we're farming, when, how, where, our water quality. We're seeing these algae blooms. That's taking a toll on the drinking water and also on our recreation, and that plays into tourism dollars. So all of this gets connected, and people feel this all the way down to their ways of life. These cultural identities we have, whether it's we love to go ice fishing in Minnesota or whether we fish on the banks across the Southeast, it's affecting how we approach those ways of life and the things that we pass down through our generations. So this is on full display. And the thing is, regardless of your political interests, this is happening, and it's something that we have to deal with. And even in a time when COVID is putting some of our biggest issues on display with health, economy, and our social justice issues, all of that is amplified with climate change. So it truly is, in my opinion, the biggest challenge of our time. And if we don't figure out a way to deal with this now, it's only going to get worse. So here at Climate Central, one thing I did want to convey to all of you is that we work with local media across the country, and we're finding some ways to really get this message across in ways that work. It's something that we've studied and really messaged in a long time here. And a couple of things I kind of want to give to everybody as we think through that. And what has worked is, you know, the golden rule of communication is know your audience, but really think through that with topic, tone, timing of how you address certain issues. Meeting people where they are, identified on shared interests, because everyone is feeling this somehow, and everyone comes at it from a different angle. And we do know that regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, there's huge interest and support for renewable energy, and that's a good way to get into conversation about this with people. Personalize, localize the issue. It is a global issue, but what we're experiencing in Louisiana and what we're experiencing in Wisconsin are different. So we have to take that local perspective to help people really understand what's going on and what we can do about it. And one thing I do want to leave everyone with is not to be afraid about talking about this issue, because science is on your side. Facts are on your side.
Well, thank you so much, Bernadette. And it's a good opportunity to turn to Senator Landrieu. We heard, especially at the end, not only about what Americans are facing every day, whether they're living through the small changes of climate or some of the bigger, more extreme events, which unfortunately, you know, your native Louisiana has had more than its share of, but also this idea of meeting people where they are and finding shared interests. That's been a little in short supply in Washington, and particularly in the halls of Congress lately. But we have a different divided government coming in 2021. What is the mix of adaptation and mitigation policies that you see as possible and necessary to address climate change and the increasing weather impacts that state and local officials are having to deal with, and that Congress might actually be able to get through?
Well, first of all, let me just say how pleased I am to be a part of this really amazing panel. And I'll have to say, Bernadette, A+100 in your presentation. And I think that should be our theme song, Lieutenant Governor, is meeting people where they are. and hoping and working hard to move them, nudge them, encourage them to where we all need to be. And I could not have said it any better than Bernadette did. And I think that's been missing from the climate conversation. There's been sort of a lot of preaching going on, maybe on both sides, maybe more on one side than the other. That might be from our side, the Democratic side. There's been a lot of stories about what's happening globally, and you can see the polar bear in your mind, sort of the visual of climate change. And while I'm sympathetic to polar bears, we don't have many in Louisiana, so it doesn't speak to us. What does speak to us is watching, the Mr. Go that was built destroy the marshland in St. Bernard Parish, and 67,000 people that lived in St. Bernard lost everything. Every home was flooded. It sits right next to the lower Ninth Ward, which, everyone in America has a visual of. Two communities on the same level, et cetera, et cetera. And so I could not agree with Bernadette more in the work that I'm doing, particularly, or have been trying to do, with the senators in the Climate Solutions Caucus led by Chris Coons and Mike Braun. It's a center-right, center-left. We have conservatives, moderates, and some liberals in the caucus that they invited 2 by 2, like Noah's Ark, 14. They are trying to build, a center approach by doing exactly what Bernadette said, meeting senators where they are. And I'll just say a few things that might be helpful to this very important and professional and expert group of elected officials from all over. That is a very effective strategy. Bernadette mentioned a few. So let me say, some of the members, both locally, and the lieutenant governor knows this, some, legislators at home in different states, or some members of Congress are very focused on their agriculture constituents. And they will listen to their farmers. When the farmers are saying, hey, something is really just not right here. I mean, this is what happened in the last couple of decades on our farm, and now this is what's happening. Take advantage of that and build on it, and, try to, what I call it's an on-ramp for particularly Republicans to get more comfortable in the conversation, and some more conservative and moderate Democrats to get more comfortable. I think sports is an excellent on-ramp with the, conservation community, the sportsmen, we call them the hook and bullet crowd. They're always fishing, and they're doing this, and they go to the bass tournaments, and then they're catching redfish out in the, in the Gulf, et cetera, et cetera. They're noticing things and reporting back to their clubs and everything. I think if we as Democrats could just get a little bit more careful in our communication and meet people like where they are, talk about the things that matter to them in ways that matter, we might be surprised at the kind of stronger bipartisan grassroots support we could build, for some serious, and I'm not talking about just window dressing, pretending you're doing something for climate and you're not. I'm talking about the real deal. Getting back into Paris, meeting our targets, maybe even exceeding our targets. But I think we could do it in a more, conducive way, just finding those right on-ramps, meeting people where they are, and then working with the coalitions that are sort of naturally forming. We'd love to see something coming together more in the House. But this Senate caucus is the real darn deal. And there are a lot of other things going on. That's not the only one. But the Senate is pretty poised if we can come up with some, responsible approaches. And I think we can. The last thing I'll say is obviously no one could do this better, very few, than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and particularly Joe, who has spent his life understanding how Congress works. He's respectful of the system. He's respectful of the people in the system. He understands you have to be practical in this way. I think we have a great opportunity.
Well, thank you, Senator. Lieutenant Governor Barnes, you have a hook and bullet crowd in Wisconsin as well, and it's a really very diverse state with urban areas as well, significant communities of color, both significant progressive communities and conservatives. How do you engage such a diverse set of people on an issue that they experience differently and maybe thinking about differently?
Yeah, I'll say, don't we ever have a hook and bullet crowd? And I'm glad that Senator Landrieu mentioned that, because it's an important part of the work that we do. And we have some organizations that have been intentionally organizing those communities for quite some time now. And I will also say, it's funny because I literally use the exact same scenario when I talk about polar bears. And I talk about that being one of the reasons why we always haven't been able to connect climate change to communities of color or just or rural communities, because again, it is very cold in Wisconsin. Our climate is not different than Louisiana, but there are still no polar bears here in Wisconsin. And it automatically, people can't associate with it. The common person, the person you bump into on the street, that is not going to be their concern. But the quality of air and the quality of drinking water, or the historic levels of flooding, or the or the polar vortices that we experience here in the state of Wisconsin, with wind chills that get to negative 50 and 60 degrees. It is wild. And so with that said, the work that we do to connect those broader communities is something that we knew that we had to do if we wanted to be impactful with this work. And when we put together our climate change task force, we wanted to be sure that there was regional diversity. We want to be sure that there was diversity in background, profession, discipline, racial diversity, economic diversity. As many people who haven't been to the table together as possible, but are impacted with this work in one way or another. Too often there will be competing interests. People who are on one side or another of climate change are maybe more intense than another group of people are when it comes to what we do to combat climate change. But the fact of the matter is, too often these are communities and constituencies, individuals and groups that haven't talked to each other. And so we want to be sure that we provided a space to have thoughtful and thought-provoking discussion amongst people who all had a say-so, who all had some sort of experience, whether it was on the advocacy side or whether it was dealing with the adverse impacts of climate change. We got to all 72 counties last year in the state, and we want to be very intentional about that. I'm glad we did it in the first year, because given the pandemic, we were unable to do that again this year. But unfortunately, the reason we got to all 72 counties was because there were a lot of storm damage tours that we had to do. And we had a chance to, talk with people in all sorts of communities across this state. And, when we're driving down the road and we see a family who's picking up debris from their barn, who's picking up debris from the storm that just tore through their community, we don't stop and say, hey, what do you do for a living? Hey, are you Democrat or Republican? We stop and ask, do you need help? And people sit and have those conversations with us, and they say, well, this wasn't supposed to happen. It happened last year. It wasn't supposed to happen this year. It's supposed to be another 100 years before something like this takes place. So when we were able to talk to people in some of the worst experiences and the worst moments of their lives, we then, try to invite people to further discussions. And although a lot of people in certain communities won't necessarily say it's climate change, they know that something is wrong. Here in the state, we see, we're surrounded by 3 bodies of fresh water. I feel like repeating that every climate change discussion I have, because we have Lake Superior to the north that is warming up quicker than the rest of the Great Lakes. We have, Lake Michigan to the east, where, I live in Milwaukee. We're right on Lake Michigan. And at the rate that Lake Michigan is warming, it is threatening our perch in the water and our trout streams. People travel internationally to come to Wisconsin to fish in our trout streams. And if they continue warming at the rate that they are, there will be no more trout in those streams. And it impacts business. It impacts tourism. It impacts rural economies in general. And when we get to, point out, just when we don't just say climate change, when we talk about what happens because of climate change, I feel that is how we've been able to get more people on board to have reasonable and thoughtful discussion about what's going on. But we're, obviously a very long way from getting where we need to be, because our legislature, unfortunately, doesn't want to act on some of the key provisions that we need to implement to reverse the impact of climate change. But while they're still trying to figure it out, we are on our public information campaign, making sure that the people in communities urban, suburban, and rural all understand what's going on and know that there is a role that state government has to play. And I'm excited about the incoming Biden administration because that presents us an opportunity to have one more ally, the strongest ally, I would say, in the fight against climate change. And before I close, too, I know I talked about the public information campaign, but we also have many local government entities who've been doing this work since before our administration came in. And now they're able to do that work without the threat of preemption, which was a very real concern with the prior administration. And the city of River Falls, they quietly got to 100% carbon-free, emissions. Zero emissions, 100% carbon-free electricity for city government functions. They're there already. And it's like, I feel like they did it without telling anybody. It just sort of happened. And, we had them to come report out at our climate change task force, which was, great because they got to provide an example. It wasn't Madison. It wasn't Milwaukee. It wasn't Green Bay. This is a city that a lot of people across the country have never heard of, but they are providing an example of how cities and local government can lead on climate.
And Lieutenant Governor Barnes and for all of you, we're actually in a discussion about climate change at the end of a year that has seen a lot of gridlock and a lot of frustration with government and partisanship. This is a panel that's offering a lot of hope. And we do have a couple more minutes. I'd pose to each of you, and let's start reverse order with the Lieutenant Governor and then the Senator, and we'll close out with Bernadette. If there is one piece of advice, either for the rest of the viewers' request or for elected officials in Washington that you'd want to see to get more action or change the conversation, what would you do based on the experience and it sounds like some real progress that's happening in Wisconsin despite all the challenges we face?
Yeah, good question.
You have to close optimistically.
Yeah, gotta close optimistically. The fact is, all people basically want the same thing, and climate is a big part of quality of life issues for people, regardless of where you are. You want clean water, you want clean air, you want protected outdoor spaces for a variety of reasons. And if that's not the case, it gives people a reason to become interested in the work that we're doing. And so I would say that, it is a lot of this work is long overdue, but I think that because it's overdue, there's been so much organizing that's been taking place at varying levels, I'll say, too, from people who are, the most intense and about this issue to people who just casually have a casual understanding of it. But the fact is that work has been happening regardless of the level of action, and the organizing has been taking place, and now we are ready to move. And I'm honored. I'm excited that we have an administration in the federal government with Joe Biden that's going to help us make all this a reality.
Senator Landrieu?
And I would agree with that, and just jump in and say that one of the strategies that I've been pushing here in Washington with some degree of success, not complete success, is to urge the advocates to work with industry, not against industry. Find the large employers, the industrial base, the manufacturing base, the economic drivers in your community, and at least try to approach them. I mean, this sounds elementary, but sometimes I think from the Democratic left, we just haven't, for some reason, it's just not a natural action. And I think it has to be to try to work with industry, because I'm finding a couple of things, that some industries, even fossil fuel industries, and even coal, even, industries, cement, steel, that you would not think, because it's a big part of the problem, of course. There's more leaning forward, big tech obviously is leaning forward, manufacturing base. There's some kind of interesting things happening with the big companies and medium companies, even in small companies. So I just would caution everybody in building Go to your industries. They may not listen, they may not want to, and you have to then decide, well, at least we tried and move on. But if we can build that partnership, and then secondly, anything we build at the local level or federal level, the more bipartisan we can build it, the more durable, the more lasting it will be, and the more likely you are to build the kind of coalition that Joe Biden's going to need to really get something substantial done. And I'll just say this, for positive for Democrats and a warning to Republicans, if there are Republicans on this call, I don't know. The young people in this country are very serious. Now I sound like Bernie Sanders, but the young people in this country are very serious about this issue. And for any political party to think it has a future and not get this issue right, they are just really mistaken. So I think Democrats, can lead on it for sure. We need to try to lead from the center, but we do have to be respectful of many on the Republican side that maybe see it differently. And like Bernadette said, let them come to us on the road that they are likely to travel, instead of pushing them into a road that they just can't either sell to their constituents or to themselves. I'll leave it there, but thank you guys. It's been great.
Thank you, Senator. Bernadette?
Yeah, and to build upon all of those great thoughts too, and not to overlap, one of the really interesting things with this big issue that we face is we know what causes it. We know how to fix it. And some of the solutions already exist. We just have to scale them. We're at a point in society too where it would cost more on our health, on our economy, on our ways of life if we don't take action. We're there. And if you actually get to that point and understanding what those solutions are, there's a whole new world of really cool things that exist that are fun. I mean, drive an electric vehicle if you haven't. It's like a rocket ship. It is so fun. So this is a really good future to look at and to try and get us into. So that's one big thing. And as we head into 2021, I know we're focused on the politics of this, but this is a huge climate year in general. We've got the big IPCC report coming out this year. We're going to have the big UN conference at COP26. That'll dump us into the next year with another national climate assessment report. So the science is marching on, the impacts are marching on, the solutions are advancing at such a rate that we want to be part of it as Americans. We want to be part of driving the future and actually owning some of that economy. So there's a lot of real opportunity in all of this too that should not get overlooked in the discussion.
Well, that's a really great note to end on. And thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you to the Lieutenant Governor and to Senator Landrieu and to Bernadette for really insightful and optimistic remarks. It's a great way to wrap up 2020 and give a launching pad for working on this with the new administration in 2021 as well. And hopefully everyone who's been watching this also walks away and tells everyone else that they were part of an optimistic and hopeful panel and discussion on climate change, which is the tenor, what the conversation really should be. So we've got a lot of ways to address it and a lot of great communication. So thank you so much to the New Deal for having me and having all of our guests, and look forward to continuing this conversation into the future.
Thank you.
Hi, so sorry about that. I'm Liz Howard. I'm a senior counsel for the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice, and I'm the former Deputy Commissioner of Elections in Virginia. I am so honored to be with you this afternoon and so grateful for all of the work of the New Deal, especially their work in support of leaders who promote progressive and innovative solutions to the problems that we're facing. And I think their work has never been more important than this year. As we've certainly faced so many problems. And as we finally bring this year to a close, we know that many of the issues that we faced in 2020 are going to linger into 2021 and perhaps expand. And this concern certainly applies to our democracy. The beginning of 2020 was a dark period for many of our election officials. The chronic underfunding of our election infrastructure and our election officials has left many of them ill prepared for what we saw this year. However, in these dire circumstances, we definitely found many heroes, election officials who refused to bow and in essence doubled their efforts to make voting easy, safe, and secure. And today we're joined by two of those champions for democracy. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who took immediate action in the face of the pandemic. Her state had one of the first primary elections in the midst of this pandemic, and she immediately worked with locals to ensure that voters received an absentee ballot application and in addition, a paid envelope to return their absentee ballot application. And that absolutely set the stage for her work and the policies that she set for the remainder of the year in the lead up to the November 2020 election through the rest of the pandemic to make voting safe and secure in Michigan. And no surprise to many of us, in spite of the dire circumstances, Michigan saw record voter registration and a record turnout in November 2020. Adrian Fontes, the recorder for the second largest election jurisdiction in our country, Maricopa County, is also such a champion. He also faced a primary that was held at the very beginning of the pandemic. Adrian's recorder Fontes' response was to immediately pursue an attempt to proactively provide absentee ballots to all of his voters. He, as expected, and he knew the conservative leaders in his state immediately fought to prevent him from doing this, but he absolutely set the stage for making it as easy as possible for all of the voters in Maricopa County to vote and to register. And again, no surprise, in Maricopa County, we saw a record turnout in the November 2020 election. And I personally am so very glad to see both of them. It has been a tough year, and I'm so appreciative of their smiles and to be here with them today. And Secretary, I'm going to start with you today. 2020 was like no election ever in our history. And you did so much, and so many states had to change policies and change procedures. What do you think worked really well in Michigan, and what were some of the challenges that you faced in deciding on selecting those options and implementing them?
Well, it's great to be here and great to be part of this conversation, especially with two great allies as Liz and Adrian have been throughout this year and throughout the work. And so, yeah, this has really been an incredible year, but it's been a successful year, truly. I mean, it was a successful year that we tracked week by week by week, starting in January, as we knew we were going to be preparing for lots of different potential contingencies, dramatic challenges to the security of our elections. We anticipated there would be a lot of misinformation. We were already preparing to implement a statewide vote from home effort because voters voted overwhelmingly in Michigan in 2018 to amend our state constitution to give themselves the right to vote absentee. So they were really on top of this before any of us were. And it was really just an honor to continue their will. I think what we noticed early on, I mean, March 10th was our presidential primary. We had 4 elections this year, one in March, one in May, one in August, and then, of course, the grand finale in November. And what we saw March 10th was the storm of the pandemic had not yet hit Michigan. We had a very successful high turnout presidential primary with a lot of people registering to vote on Election Day, which was also a new right, and voting from home or absentee. And 2 hours after the polls closed March 10th, I got a call from the governor saying she was about to announce the first 2 coronavirus cases diagnosed in Michigan. So from then on, we began preparing for May, and noting importantly at that point that and this is sort of to your question about what guided our decisions, that we already knew we were going to be under intense scrutiny because of Michigan, but on top of that every decision we made was going to create a precedent for how to manage elections in the midst of a pandemic. And when we saw other states consolidating precincts, that didn't work. So we immediately began recruiting poll workers statewide in April to avoid the need to close down precincts, but also began encouraging people to know there are other options so they didn't have to vote in person, getting PPE, all of that. But the other big decision we made early on, and this seems, antiquated now, but it was a really big deal at the time. We were under a lot of pressure to delay our election in May, and a lot of states did. Ohio delayed their primary, and we saw a lot of states make that decision for their, and everyone makes their own decisions. But for me, it was really important to use that May election to demonstrate that it is possible to hold an election in the midst of a pandemic, to use the fact that it was a local election, only 10% of our electorate or jurisdictions were a part of it, to pilot ways that we may need to prepare for the fall. And that was such a critical decision. It was met with a lot of pushback, particularly from my predecessor, who demanded that we delay the election. And I knew that in doing so, we would create a precedent that could create a narrative that elections could be delayed in the fall, which we knew was unacceptable. And that secondly, would miss an opportunity to begin building to manage a record turnout election in a pandemic in the fall. And that we should instead build for that in terms of instead of hoping that it would have gone away by then, which we know it didn't. So that was a critical decision we made early on. And then that set the tone for every week to follow, where we immediately learned from the May election. Because we mailed applications to every voter participating in that May election as well, so they could vote from home. 99% of the voters did. And then that enabled us to begin setting the stage to prepare for August and November in the same way, and ultimately put us on a path towards success.
Thank you so much. Recorder Fontez, what were some of the decisions that you made that you thought worked really well and were important to the success that you saw?
Well, Liz and Secretary Benson, I want to thank you and thank New Deal and thank all the folks who help New Deal do the work that they do. I'm really excited to be a part of this organization and be able to talk about this. The Secretary mentioned several elections in 2020. Interestingly, when Michigan was having their presidential primary on March 10th, we were actually having jurisdictional elections in Tempe and Chandler and around Maricopa County, and then getting set for 1 week later to have our presidential preference election on March 17th. So we had election days 1 week apart from one another, where we had to do what we do every 4 years here in Arizona, and that is deal with sort of this really weird presidential thing that happens in the middle of our 4-date election calendar, which is every year, March, May, August, and November. And yes, as you mentioned earlier, we did take some unprecedented steps and some bold moves, and we were stopped from trying to do what was necessary, operating almost in the exact same environment that the Secretary was operating in Michigan. We wanted to do everything in light of helping the voters to actually get their ballots, turn out, and do what we could, not just to have a good, solid election with great turnout, but to try to maximize that as much as possible. Some of the things, as was mentioned by the Secretary, that were interesting individual challenges, I'll just talk about a couple of the specifics. Right before our election, I think it was about a week and a half ahead of time, the state of California declared an emergency and sucked all of the PPE out of the supply chain in the Western United States. And that meant that whatever we were getting ready to order and had ready for us, all of a sudden ended up getting diverted. And so we had no choice but to switch from a precinct-based polling place model into a vote center model, where you didn't go to an assigned precinct, but you were able to vote at any of the precincts around the entire county. Now, when you're talking about about 2.5 million voters, and nearly 800 precincts, you're talking about a pretty massive endeavor. And then having to reprogram all of the electronic check-in site books that we have engineered here, plus being able to print the different ballot styles for every single possible voter at every single possible vote center was a significant challenge. And so our IT staff, the folks that we had as partners along the way, really did yeoman's work. And it's hard to do this without the right people on the ground, right? So the programmers on the backside, God bless those guys. They stayed up a couple of nights in a row. It was all Red Bull and Monsters up on the 4th floor over at the admin building to keep them awake and programming. And when we got into the fall, I'll give you one other little example. We actually had to end up changing our voter registration date in October, and it changed twice based on litigation and court orders. And I think what a lot of people don't realize and this was, again, as a response to COVID-19 and litigation, what folks don't realize is you can change a voter registration date, but you've got probably 12 different things that happen based on that one date. And so if you're not in the election administration world, if you're sitting on a bench somewhere wearing a black robe, you say, well, let's just move the date from here to there. Well, yeah, Judge, wait, because then we got this and this and this and this and this. And if you're the subject of a ruling where you're not actually included to explain these sorts of things, it's no wonder that we had to scramble. And we didn't just get that date changed once on us in the fall. We got it changed twice on us. So at the administrator's level, as the registrar of voters, for 2.6 million Americans, we really had to scramble around a lot. And I give credit to the dedication of the folks that we hired, right? Those temporary workers who come in for a couple months at a time, the folks who work the vote centers, the folks who talk to voters on the ground, our folks answering the phones and returning the emails. They were incredibly ready to respond and willing to go. And I cannot express sufficiently my gratitude to the citizens of Maricopa County, Arizona. For our fall election, we needed around 3,500 folks to work the election, from truck drivers and warehouse workers to folks to clean and catalog equipment at the end, adjudicators and validators and judges and folks. We had over 20,000 people apply for those 3,500 jobs. And so I have a lot of faith in the folks who not only did the work, but the folks out there who wanted to do the work. Democracy is alive and well in America, and it's not just because of folks like the secretary and myself who get to be out in front of these things. It's all those folks back at the home office who are still, frankly, to this day, cleaning, cataloging, and preparing equipment. Because guess what? We've got elections in March, and this doesn't stop, whether I'm going to be around or not. And so kudos to the folks on the ground. They're the ones that actually made this happen across the entire republic.
Yeah, there were so many heroes, really, in this election. And I think, certainly one of my concerns, especially when I see some of the feedback and in reality, some of the death threats that election officials and others that were involved in elections have received. I am very excited to hear that, you have so many people that are already ready and willing to work in your upcoming elections. But can we talk about that for a second? And can we talk about any concerns, if you have concerns, or if not, why not, about the kind of narrative, the negative narrative and the attack from the White House and from others, and what you think that might be doing to those other people that are so imperative and to our election officials that we need in order to run safe and secure elections. Secretary, did you want to take this first? I know y'all implemented so many innovative solutions to recruit new poll workers and to make sure that you had plenty of people to help with the November and so many other elections.
Yeah, just briefly, back in that preparation for that May election, recognizing that we saw Wisconsin have to reduce polling locations due to a lack of poll workers, we launched a poll worker recruitment effort for the May election in April, thinking we'd get a couple hundred, which is really more or less what we needed. We got 2,000 in 10 days of people signing up in the midst of the first wave of the pandemic to protect democracy. And by the end of the election cycle, we had 33,000 individuals signing up to be election workers, which was an abundance, much more than we had ever anticipated. But that really reflects what we're going to see now, I think, moving forward, which is that on both sides of the aisle, at the end of the day, I believe that people want their vote to count. They want their elections to work, and they want to believe in democracy. And they have every reason after this year's elections to believe in democracy because of the reality of what we all accomplished. And I appreciate the elevation of election workers, poll workers, our local election administrators, state election administrators this year, because it's important for people to embrace those leaders, but also want to be those leaders. And so I think moving forward, we're going to see a lot more people wanting to do more than vote. I certainly hope so, and investing their time and energy in making democracy work, and hopefully in that recognizing that we all have to do that in order for the republic and democracy itself to work and stay healthy moving forward.
And Adrian?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things from my perspective was, when I came into office in January of 2017, Maricopa County, for those of you who don't know, used to be the home of the former alleged toughest sheriff in America, a very red county. We have a 4-to-1 majority Republican Board of Supervisors. The Arizona legislature has been dominated by Republicans for a long time. All of our statewide officers were Republicans when I took office, and I replaced a 28-year veteran in this space. And so when the 2018 election came around, we already were at that point receiving some threats because, as you know, opening the doors to democracy and letting a lot more people vote resulted in some way in having the first Democrat elected to the U.S. Senate in Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona for a while. We ended up electing Katie Hobbs, our secretary, Secretary Benson's counterpart here in Arizona. And so we ended up, receiving that in 2018. So the threats, the un-American attitude of, if I don't lose, I want to change the rules after the game's over type of thing, sort of this petulant crybaby attitude that we're seeing across the nation. We saw a little bit of that in 2018. So it's not new for us here in Maricopa County. I think the real question, and Secretary Benson sort of alluded to this for sure, is are we going to be able to take that, put it in a box and move it to the side and recognize that, this really weak attempt at authoritarian takeover of our democracy is really just a sideshow. And while some people are more willing to entertain it and let it go and kind of sort of just watch it happen and be dismissive of it, a lot of us are really not very happy with it because it creeps. And we see it creeping into a lot of other places. We see a lot of elected officials, particularly on the national stage, avoiding the kind of accountability and responsibility to stand up for the democratic system of governance that we have. Folks who are sort of hedging towards a personality instead of towards the security of our democracy and really the underlying integrity of the republic itself. And that's really kind of disappointing to see. But at the end of the day, as with our poll workers and all the folks that I talked about a little earlier, I have faith in America. And I think that's kind of at the core of this. What we see from folks who are, making these threats, the folks who are sort of hedging their bets, they lack faith in a system that is actually operated in a bipartisan way. I don't know specific rules in Michigan or any other state, but I know in Arizona, when we open those envelopes to pull those absentee ballots out, it's a Republican and a Democrat sitting across the table from each other. When we do electronic adjudication, it's a Republican and a Democrat sitting there looking at those screens and making those decisions together. When we do ballot duplication, again, bipartisan boards across the entire spectrum, even to our mandatory hand count audit at the end of the election, that's run by the political parties. And so the people inside the warehouse, the folks who are actually doing the work, they're the keepers of the faith. They're keeping that flame burning bright. And I believe a lot more in them than I do in the folks who are out there running amok and making a mockery of American democracy. So I think we're going to be fine. It's going to take hard work, but it's like the old saying is don't let them keep you down. I can't curse anymore. My staff won't let me. Sorry.
Thank you, and thanks to your staff for that wise guidance. One of the, I did want to touch base with both of you because I think Arizona and Michigan had a slightly different stance, or at least your legislatures took a slightly different stance here. Before the election, one of the issues that many election officials did a really good job about working to educate the public on, and something that we saw absolutely impact the perception of how well the election was run, had to do with when election officials were allowed to engage in the process that Adrian referred to earlier of opening the absentee ballots, reviewing the absentee ballots, and processing them, and subsequently counting them. And so, Secretary, I mean, I recall that you tried to work with your legislature to enable to have them allow for local election officials to start this process earlier, and I think they gave a fig leaf, maybe 24 hours or something. But can you talk about kind of that decision, how that impacted election officials, and what, is there anything that we can do looking forward in that specific area?
Well, yeah, I certainly think, we need partners in our legislature to recognize when clerks are saying we need these basic nonpartisan administrative updates to our law, they should be responsive to that. And instead, politics got in the way. Some would surmise, and some surmised at the time. I mean, we advocated for pre-processing of absentee ballots from beginning in March of 2019, up until we sort of got 10 hours in large communities in September. I think now a lot of the leaders in the legislature, many of whom are term limited, have said, oh yeah, we probably should have actually listened. And so, yeah, I mean, the bottom line is we were just in full execution mode this year. And so when we knew we wouldn't get that support from the legislature, we began increasing the number of machines and recruiting poll workers to increase our capacity. And we really, in our August primary, it took 40 hours to process and tabulate 1.6 million absentee ballots statewide, again, beginning on Election Day morning, going till about 9 p.m. the next day. We doubled the number of absentee ballots from 1.6 to 3.3 million in November. But we kept that number the same through increasing capacity so that 24 hours after the polls closed, we were able to more or less announce the results of the statewide election. And notably, right around that time is when people started showing up to where absentee ballots were being counted and demanding, sort of saw the political strategy unfold that we've been living in this since then. But I'm really proud that everything went very smooth. We finished twice as faster as we thought we would, but that's not sustainable. And now we need the legislature to do their part and give us what they give Arizona, Florida, Ohio, and many other states, the ability to pre-process those absentee ballots so that we're not every year enduring this heartburn on Election Day, but instead managing elections in a much more humane way.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people were very surprised to learn that election officials in different states aren't subject to the same rules as far as when they can start processing absentee ballots and or tabulating absentee ballots. That absolutely caused for different timelines for when election officials were able to provide complete unofficial results from state to state. Adrian, I think that y'all got a little extra time this year, but how did the maybe extra week impact your ability to process and tabulate absentee ballots? And how long would it have taken but for the extra time that you were given?
Yeah, well, we worked very diligently as elections officials with the elections directors and the County Recorders Association across Arizona. It's a bipartisan group, right? The very clerks and career professionals that Secretary Benson was just alluding to. And we went to our legislature and in a past session, I can't remember if it was 20 or 19, and they extended our time period before Election Day to process these ballots from 7 days to 14 days. Now, very interestingly, the way we process them is going to be different than the way they get processed, for example, in Michigan. And the fact that there are 15 counties in Arizona, and I think a heck of a lot more in Michigan, and depending on the size of the jurisdiction means that regardless of how much more time or how much less time, you're going to get different processing time per ballot because of those local regulations as well. So this is a very interesting space that I think a lot of people need to recognize. elections are different everywhere across the United States, over 3,000, and I think it's 3,300 counties and parishes across the country, and we all do it a little bit differently, which is great. So yeah, they gave us 14 days. And here's the interesting thing. From 2016 to 2020, just in Maricopa County alone, not only did we increase the number of eligible voters by about 500,000, from about 2.1 to just under 2.6 million in Maricopa County alone, we went from 74% to 80% turnout, a little over 80%. That means, as a raw number, we had 600,000 more ballots in just Maricopa County alone. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the legislature and the governor for signing off on that law that gave us that extra time. Had we not had that amount of time, I think we would have run right up to the canvass, which is about, I think it's about 3 weeks after Election Day, and we would have been jamming the entire time. Now, again, that has to do with the different way that we process those ballots before we get them out of the envelope and so forth. So it's not an apples to apples comparison when you're talking about expanding. And when you're talking about a massive jurisdiction like Maricopa County and the volume that we have to deal with, it's also a little bit different too. So without that expansion that we got, and it was a bipartisan effort, and we worked together with them. And we in Arizona, generally, we got a pretty good system. I think we have a bad reputation, but we have a really good system. And we do work together pretty well behind the scenes. I think, it's a little Wild West. We like putting it out there that we're a little nuts, but, on the inside, we're just one happy scorpion eating family. But you got to have those folks at the table, our policymakers. You got to have us at the table so that you can make intelligent, data-driven decisions regarding the administration of elections, because the administration of elections is not political or should not be political. It's about efficiency. It's about nimbleness. It's about agility. It's about getting the right resources in the right places to do the job well, quickly, verifiably, and so that we can maintain the integrity of our elections, which I think we've done pretty well.
I mean, as we close up, I just want to say thank you so much to both of you for the incredible work that you did in 2020 for voters and our democracy. And thanks so much to any election officials that are on the line and that are here with us today. We've got about 1 more minute. I would love to kind of get some closing thoughts from both of you, Secretary Benson.
Well, I think, we all have a role to play in ensuring that moving forward, our elections continue to be smooth and secure, whether it's individuals using and everyone here has a platform of influence. Use that platform to speak the truth about the success we had in elections this year. Use your platform to encourage, or your leadership to encourage others to actually work in election administration, either at the local or state level or as an election worker, and recognize that we all have a responsibility to ensure that our democracy thrives moving forward.
Thank you so much. Recorder Fontes.
And I'll just piggyback on what the secretary said, because she and I are panel buddies, as you know. We appear on these panels together. So it's great to see you again, Jocelyn. In doing that work in speaking that truth, have guts, have faith, and make sure that you have sort of all of our American ideals in mind all along the way, right? This is really where the voter's experience is critical. And if you really direct yourself towards the voter is who matters here, not the politicians, not the campaigns, but the voters. If you're focused in that way, regardless of where you are in the process, you're going to have great elections, elections that we can all believe in and share together with pride as Americans.
That's a great way to end this panel. Thank you both, and thank you to New Deal.
No.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a fascinating conversation, and just appreciate all the time there. And these are critical times, that's for sure. And while I'm especially proud to be the founder of the New Deal, this incredible network of leaders around the country. And before I go on, just for a quick introduction, I want to take my last chance to thank Debbie and her team, our extraordinary board of directors, our allies, and our generous supporters, and my dog sitting down here. I also just want to, just thank you all for allowing us to identify and nurture these incredible leaders all around the country. And I must say, we love our leaders. We will do anything to help you all. You are the future, you are the current, and you have impacted the past already and really helped us so far. And we're so excited for January 20th. Speaking of, I am thrilled to just thank and welcome my great friend, John McCarthy. He is a road warrior from the campaign. He served on there since, I think, last September, so September of 2019. If you don't know him, and I'm guessing every single elected leader on this call knows John well. I'm sure you worked with him very closely already on the campaign, and because I know he would never leave any stone unturned. And he's also just a great New Deal champion and friend of ours. And as I always say, the future is bright. And I say that future is very bright because of people like John, but specifically John, who, again, worked so hard and really have the potential to impact so many great things for our country and the world moving forward. So with that, I'm going to turn over to my thoughtful, effective, enthusiastic, and loyal friend, John McCarthy, who I think really doesn't need an introduction, but it was fun to do anyway.
Thank you so much, Helen. Really appreciate it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't start out by saying thanks, of course, to you and Debbie and the entire team and the amazing leaders and supporters that are on the call. I have gotten to work with many of the New Deal leaders, but for those who haven't, I was the deputy political director on the Biden campaign. And really the thing that I want to echo the most is just a huge amount of thanks for everything that you did for our campaign. It's really interesting because I think while we're all sitting at home and now hitting the holiday season a year later, it's an appropriate time to feel sentimental. And I was actually just thinking before I jumped on about how we were all gathered in DC last time around, and it was a totally different world in every sense and description of that phrase. It was a crowded primary, and there were people of, supporters of all the different campaigns getting together and talking about what was at stake for the party. And, that was a wonderful conversation, and getting to meet so many of you there was amazing, and new friends that then joined our campaign shortly thereafter. And then as the party consolidated behind Vice President Biden, now President-elect Biden, I can look back at kind of each of those moments and think about the incredible New Deal leaders that were there with us at every step of the way. When I look back at some of our earliest endorsers, we had young, amazing, talented voices who are out there talking about how, the president-elect was first elected at 29, and people were that same age when they were serving, and talking about how they found a parallel. And importantly, for so many of those amazing young elected leaders, these were the voices who really can talk effectively about issues that matter to those, their peers, young voters, but as elected officials and leaders themselves, able to talk about actually getting things done. And when I think back about all the different ways that New Deal leaders played a role in our campaign, from serving as surrogates to helping us on our policy committees, to helping us build out infrastructure in our states, to recommending talent, to helping us source intel and last-minute information. We're obviously coming to this with an abundance of gratitude, but also really importantly, I think, as we think about what does a Biden-Harris administration look like and hope to accomplish, I think that for all of us, we hope that the New Deal leaders will still be with us at every step of the way, because in the way that the world has changed in so many ways, it's not just that we're all sitting home on Zoom calls now. I think that we all realize how interconnected the world really is. This virus has certainly shown that. These awful moments of racial unrest, these tough policy priorities that we're now having to sit and wade through. It is never more evident that we need amazing leaders at all levels of government who really want to take on the substance, do the hard work, and ultimately do the important work of governing with smart solutions. And that is something that each and every one of you on this call has done and has helped us talk about through the campaign, and hopefully will be able to help us do as we work to govern. So the same posture on the campaign. If there's anything that we can do, we are here. We want to hear your advice and guidance and make sure that we are not missing anything. For those of you who, of course, know the president-elect, his deep commitment to all of that as well. And the same thing for our vice president-elect. They certainly understand the important role that elected officials at all levels of government play. So we look forward to that chance of getting to work together. And if you need absolutely anything at all, we are certainly here and excited to work with the New Deal leaders at every step of the way. So a huge thanks to Helen and Debbie, not just for giving us a chance to chat with everyone today, but more importantly for being just the most amazing sourcers of talent in the party, because it is sometimes really hard to sit and say, how do we find the best and smartest, most amazing people? And New Deal has solved that for us. So a huge amount of thanks, and looking very forward to working together in the months and year ahead. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Helen.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan Coonerty. I'm a New Deal leader. I'm a 3rd District County Supervisor out here in Santa Cruz, California, and I'm the co-host of the New Deal's podcast, An Honorable Profession. I want to just make a quick plug to encourage you all to listen to our latest episode with Ryan Fechtow. He's the new Speaker of the House of the Maine Legislature, first openly gay speaker in Maine's history, and we're really excited. Next week, we're going to have Alex Padilla, who's the Secretary of State of California, also a New Deal leader, and possibly the next U.S. Senator from California. But today we have an amazing panel today to talk about the lessons of the 2020 election. The election was only a month ago. It feels like a lifetime ago, as everything does in 2020. But we have some amazing panelists here to talk to us today. First, we have North Dakota former Senator Heidi Heitkamp. She was also served as the Attorney General and is a remarkable leader in helping to bridge the rural-urban divide in our country. Then we have Patti Solis Doyle, who's a veteran of the Obama and Clinton campaigns and just one of the best minds in American politics today, and we're lucky to have her. And then we have Georgia representatives and New Deal leader Scott Holcomb, who's going to talk about, there's this little election coming up in Georgia that people seem to be paying attention to that we thought we'd check in and find out what's going on. But I want to start with Senator Heitkamp and get your impressions now a month out of the 2020 election and the lessons learned.
Well, to begin with, people keep saying the Democrats did poorly, and I keep going, we retained the House, we elected a president, and we have a pretty good shot. And we'll hear more from our friends in Georgia, but we have a pretty good shot at taking the Senate. So can we just all calibrate? Because this is one of those things where it's the law of high expectations. And when those high expectations aren't met, which is we thought this was going to be a defining swing election. We thought that this was going to realign Democratic politics for a long time. We worked very hard to do outreach, but we were at One Country. And for those who don't know, I was blessed with a lot of campaign dollars. I'm an old attorney general. And so when people give you money, you try and fulfill the purpose of that money. And I know that so many of my donors in the past have really wanted to see places like North Dakota and South Dakota and Iowa do better for the Democratic Party. And so we dedicated a fair amount of those resources to growing the Democrat base, or at least restoring some Democrat base in rural America. And this is our first cycle. And we have been predicting at One Country Project that if we do not do better in rural America, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to be a majority party going forward. I think that one of the lessons from this election is exactly that, which is in places where we actually grew the Democratic voter base, where it was in suburbia. Senator or Vice President, now President-elect Biden did better than Hillary in many rural areas, but Trump did better than what he did in many of those rural areas. And so you're going to see these percentages as we analyze this information really sending a message that we have to redouble our efforts to have a broader, more resounding Democratic base. We can't just keep going back to the same voters and say, please, more of you show up, more of you come, and be a majority party. I think that's really the lesson of this election for me. I want to say something about New Deal leaders. I want everybody in America to listen to all of you talk about the issues that you're engaged in and the work that you're doing. We have, I think, a problem in the Democratic Party, and that is that we tend to focus all of our attention at people on the top instead of putting a big flashlight and a big spotlight on two leaders like we just saw leading elections under very difficult circumstances. They speak to who we are as a Democrat and the Democratic Party to get things done. And so we've got 2 years now where I hope we get the majority in the Senate. We need to use that majority. We need to use that power to really affect people's lives. And if we do that and we communicate how we're affecting people's lives, I think we can defy the odds on typical midterm elections where the ruling party loses seats, and we can gain back some of the seats that we lost in the House in 2018 and build on our Democratic majority in the Senate and give Joe Biden even more ability and Kamala Harris even more ability to govern this country. But we aren't going to do it by looking to just Washington. And that's why the work that you're doing is so, so, so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for that optimistic reminder and framing. Are there particular issues or messages that the Democratic Party you feel needs to be focused on in order to expand our base or hold our base and expand the map for success?
You know, it's interesting because people say, well, you started this thing and it really is about speaking to rural America. And I kind of laugh and say, look, you know, when we started, you all want to brand something, right? And initially people were saying, well, we should call it the Rural Project. We should do this. And I said, no, let's call it One Country. Because for me, what we have to be talking about is restoring the faith of working men and women in the fact that we as the Democratic Party respect the dignity of work and that we are going to reward work with the right kind of policies, that we are going to reward hardworking entrepreneurs to make sure that they have the ability to move forward and thrive. We are going to look at not economies that benefit the coast, but economies that deal with helping in the center of the country. You know, I heard a statistic, 80 to 85% of all venture capital is invested in 3 states, Massachusetts, New York, and California. We need to be the party that says that's not right. We need to be the party that talks about how we're going to invest in every part of the country. And then we need to do something we're really bad at as Democrats. We need to tell people what we're doing. We need to get them identified. I mean, just your label here, New Deal. We all know what that is. It was taking something in the depths of despair and building back a world-class economy and world-class opportunity for average people like my mom and dad, my grandparents. That's who we are as Democrats. That's our heritage. We need to get back to messages that resonate with working people.
Thank you, Senator. Patti Solis Doyle, you've been through presidential campaigns, and I imagine there'll be more to come. What are your lessons learned now, a month out?
Well, I agree with the senator. I think Democrats did pretty darn well. First and foremost, we won the presidency, and Joe Biden received 81 million votes, which is more votes than anybody ever to run for president in history. What does bring me a little bit of pause is that Donald Trump received 74 million votes, which is the second most votes that anybody received in presidential history. And to me, that says that we need to work a little bit harder in reaching out to the voters that are not with us, that haven't heard our message, very much like the rural voters that the senator described. I'd like to take my time to really talk about the Latinx voters, because in my mind, and it's not just because I am a very proud Latina myself, in my mind, the Latinx vote is really the most crucial voting bloc for Dems to really dig into and to find ways to not only understand them, but to engage with them, but most importantly, to inspire them. Latinos have been and continue to be the largest minority group among U.S. eligible voters. The growth primarily is stemming from U.S.-born populations coming of age. 12.4 million Hispanics who turned 18 between the years 2000 and 2018 accounted for 80% of our growth. So obviously, I think we need to take a look at the Latinx vote and its potential very, very carefully. I want to talk about three aspects of the 2020 election as it pertains to the Latinx vote. First and foremost, Latinos are not a monolithic group. We are Puerto Rican and Cuban and Mexican and Venezuelan and Colombian, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have vast differences in generation. Many of us who are eligible to vote are Gen Zers or millennials. We have differences, obviously, in socioeconomic status. And that means that one message does not fit all. We don't just care about immigration. We care about the economy and jobs and healthcare and education. And in fact, exit polls show that the two most important issues for Latinx voters in the 2020 election were healthcare and education. So I think that means that the party really needs to be more nuanced and more targeted as they message Latino voters. Second, as I mentioned, we are the fastest growing group in terms of eligibility, and we are increasing in numbers every cycle, not just in terms of voting, but in participation as well. And by participation, I mean organizing, fundraising, volunteering, even running for office. So this is mostly coming from young Latino voters. 1 in 4 children in the US are Latino. 22% of all Gen Z voters are Latino. 17% of all millennial voters are Latino. Bernie Sanders did really well with Latino voters in the primary. And yes, some had to do with the amount of resources that his campaign put into it, staff, polling, ad buys, etc. But also his message really appealed to young voters. And I think that's where the strength in his Latino vote came from, was young voters. And finally, third, in terms of the 2020 election and Latino voters, disinformation played a huge factor for Democrats in 2020, and especially with Latinos, particularly in Florida. Trump's advantage with anti-socialist Cubans and Venezuelans in Florida relied on very dubious smearing of Biden as a socialist, which of course we all know is absurd given his centrist history. The Trump disinformation campaign not only used false messaging, but it drove it through vehicles like WhatsApp chats. A really good example was in these WhatsApp chats. The Trump campaign tried to conflate Biden and Black Lives Matter with Latin American dictators, and that was effective. So I think as we move forward, I think we need to be careful about not only what the message is, but how we distribute that message and how we disseminate that message through the vehicles where our voters are. So with that, I'm just going to end where I started. The Latino vote is going to be critical in elections moving forward. And I can tell you that both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, are sort of poring over the data from this election and taking a particular look at Latino voters and how they both can do better with them. Trump outperformed the last cycle. He did even better this time around than last time around. And because we are growing the number and we have that political power, I think both parties are really going to focus again on understanding, engaging, and inspiring the Latin vote.
Can I follow up on that last point about disinformation? the disinformation campaign that targeted Latinx voters and frankly also targeted the rural voters that Senator Heitkamp talks about is very difficult to combat. Do you have strategies, whether they be political or even legislative or regulatory, to deal with that going forward? Because it's obviously having a tremendous impact on our civic life.
Absolutely. I think it's many parallel tracks. It has to be attacked by many parallel tracks. Regulatory for sure. I think the new administration and the new Congress are going to have to really do a deep dive in how they regulate some of these big tech companies and put some stopgaps in what they allow on their platforms. Number one. Number two, I think Democrats need to be just as prolific in where and how they communicate with voters, using all of the vehicles available to them and doing it as well as Republicans did, not just in this election, but in the last election. And the media plays a huge part in this as well. It is very difficult to fact check a president who, lies so much that it's become the norm. I'm hoping that within this new administration and with President-elect Biden, we're going to go back to some of those traditional norms of communicating and fact checking. So I'm hopeful.
Okay, I appreciate the hope and optimism by our panel today. It's much needed these days. Senator, do you have a sense as to how to combat the misinformation that is also hitting places like North Dakota?
One of the things that we know is that institutions no longer are trusted. You take a look at I always call it the Walter Cronkite. And I don't think it was a myth. Whatever he said, people believed. He had that level of trust. There's no one in our universe today that is Walter Cronkite. People will go to the source that basically confirms their bias already, that speaks to what they already think. I always think I used to say this about Donald Trump when he was running in 2016. They'd say, well, what's he going to say tomorrow? I said, well, just go down to the Huff Bar, which was just a little bar cowboy bar that was probably about 20 miles south of Mandan, where I live, and just listen to what they're saying when they're watching TV. That's what Trump's going to say. Everybody thinks Trump kind of led this movement. Trump is very good at parroting what he hears in those people that he wants to keep loyal and on his side. His rallies consistently were huge focus groups. He would say something, and depending upon the reaction, he would build on that. He would repeat it, whether it was lock her up, build the wall. And these were all the mantras that he got from those big rallies. And so I don't know I'm a little less optimistic that we can do it through regulation. I think we have to do it through good local engagement. And so what does that look like? Who is your local leader? Look what Jim Clyburn was able to do in South Carolina for Joe Biden. That no one thought Joe Biden was going to get the nomination until South Carolina. The trusted source locally. You could have had all the swirl in the national media, but it was that local voice, that local respected person. And we really need to get back to looking at our party beyond the 5 or 6 people at the top, whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. I love these guys, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, whoever ends up in the cabinet, and say those people speak for us. We need to have engagement at a local level so that when people say, I don't like Democrats, and that was, if you talk to people in rural America, and if you say, why don't you like Democrats? Because they're socialists and they'll take my money and they want to defund the police and they don't care about who we are. They disrespect our values. And so we're never going to vote for a Democrat. The only way we change that is that we get Democrats in positions like Secretary of State, like county register, so that those voices that you just heard in the last panel, incredibly talented public leaders, that they become the voice of the Democratic Party locally. And I think then that changes the brand. We cannot change the Democratic brand from the top down or by the media. We have to change the Democratic brand, doing the tough work that people like you do every day in getting out there and being proud Democrats, but basically saying it's a big tent. Just because some person says this doesn't mean that's what I believe, and it shouldn't define the Democratic Party. And this goes to Patti's point about, communication.
That is a welcome message to a group of state and local officials on this call. I guess the question is to both of you before we go down and find out what's going on in Georgia is, do you see the party making the investments at the state and local level in order to build the next generation of leaders? Senator, why don't we start with you?
I think there was so much money, and the Democrats outraised the Republicans. I mean, the report today on the amount of money left over in Gideon's campaign, I think it's $14 million. So we all need to kind of recalibrate our idea about money. And we need to realize that we aren't investing it very well. If I'm a donor, if I'm somebody who gave a ton of money, I can make an argument we won, which we did. But if I gave a ton of money, I didn't get a very good return on my investment. So how do we reinvest that money in a way that actually makes a difference? And I think that's going to be a critical component. And I'm not knocking the DNC. I think the DNC worked really hard, and we were very grateful for the partnership that we had with them on the rural project. We need to redouble those efforts. We need to bring more local leaders into the DNC. We need to promote local leadership in terms of those voices. And so I think the answer is we've got to do better, and we can't do it by one-offs. We've got to have a better coordinated message, because if we just rely on American Bridge to do it, or we rely on Priorities USA or One Country, that's not going to, that becomes like this amorphous, here's the progressives fighting with the conservatives, fighting with the moderates, instead of here's the Democrats fighting for working families so that you can find affordable health care, so that you can, that's what we need to say, is not this swirl about what we disagree, but find that place in the middle. And the best people to communicate that are locally. They need the resources to do that communication. And, when the local head of the state party says, I really need someone to come to a Democratic event and give a speech, and you have to beg, that should never be. We should have a speaker bureau. I could think of 100 things that I would do that would make a difference to energize the base, to reinvigorate the Democratic Party in places where I live. But we've got to change the brand, because we can't sell the Democratic Party in North Dakota anymore.
Wow, that is amen and wow. Patti, you talked about the new generation of Latinx voters, and you.
Always happens. Ryan, we can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you. Oh, good. I thought it was just me.
Just pretend you know what the question is, Patti.
Well, actually, I don't have much to add to what you just said. Hallelujah. I agree 150%.
I want to add to what you said. If you look at that map where the rural organizing group did a map that shows a lot of the country going bluer when compared Hillary, guess where it didn't go bluer? In the Rio Grande Valley. And so this idea, and I think you are absolutely right. This idea that you can say, okay, but look what we did with DACA and look what we did with immigration, that somehow then that's going to be the rallying cry. And it number one, is kind of insulting. because it's much more diverse and much more, that the interest is much broader than that. But I also think that we have the risk that this voting bloc that should be with us, because they're working men and women, they're working hard, they're helping build this country, they're adding to the economy in record amounts. I mean, the contribution is just off the charts in terms of what they bring to our country and bring to their country, I should say. But we don't talk about those things that we need to talk about. And so I'm so glad that you're sending that message out and that it's happening for you.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that people come up to me and say, how could Hispanics, how could Latinos vote for Trump when he put babies in cages? I don't understand it. And I said, it's not so much about immigration for like the Mexicans near the Rio Grande. It's all about socioeconomic issues. For the Cubans in Florida, it was all about those social value issues. For, Mexican Americans in Arizona carried the day for Biden because of healthcare and education. So it's just different everywhere. And we just need to get better about how to communicate. I don't know if they're back or if it's just you and me, Senator.
I'm sorry, here I am. I'm on mute. I'm sorry. Let me jump in here. Ryan Coonerty, thank you for moderating. Our Silicon Valley-based person is having the internet trouble, so that's a little ironic. But I just want to say thank you to Senator Heitkamp and Patti, Solis, Doyle. Thanks both for being with us to talk about this. You gave us a lot of things to think about going forward that the party needs to absorb and process going forward into next elections. I do want to turn to Scott Holcomb, my good friend and our New Deal leader, Scott Holcomb, in Georgia, for maybe just a couple minutes on what's happening and what we should be looking for over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Debbie. It's great to be with you all, and you all have Georgia on your mind. Had to do it. We are living in a very exciting time, and we are working very, very hard. I am encouraged and optimistic about the chances for both Raphael Warnock and for Jon Ossoff. They are working extraordinarily hard, doing all the things that you would expect them to do. They are campaigning nonstop. My own sense, and I think this is consistent with some of the comments that you heard, is that there's very little elasticity in the electorate. There's not a lot of convincing that's going to take place. It really is a get out the vote operation, and Democrats are working very hard to get organized for that. I want to give a couple of shout outs to some of the New Deal leaders who have done extraordinary work. Of course, everybody's familiar with New Deal alum Stacey Abrams. She's continuing to lead efforts here on voting rights and making sure that we have fair elections. Yesterday, the crazy train came to town, Giuliani and the Trump legal team, and we had two state senators who are New Dealers, Elena Parent and Jen Jordan, who really did a terrific job speaking truth to power. What is really interesting, and I'll just share this really quickly, is Republicans are going through some challenges right now in Georgia. We have a Republican Secretary of State, and we have Republicans who administer the state election system. And the president is putting out, on one hand, that the election system and mail-in votes don't work and are fraudulent. And there are prominent Republicans who are telling Republicans to stay home and not to vote. And then there are other Republicans who are saying, no, of course, come out. It's really important. But our General Assembly isn't, I think, helping the cause, because they're giving life to these conspiracy theories by having the Senate hearing yesterday, and they just announced that they're going to have a House hearing next week. So what do I think will happen? It's going to be challenging. The history for Georgia's runoff elections for Democrats is not positive. Weich Fowler is one of my mentors. He lost a runoff in 1992. Jim Martin lost a runoff in 2008. But we're working very, very hard. So 2020 is different. And of course, we flipped the state. We put it into the blue column, which was a huge deal. And it wasn't something that was unexpected. We really kind of thought that we had a chance to do that. People worked extraordinarily hard, and we don't think it was an accident. So we're going to try to keep us in the blue column going forward.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Scott. You're right. All eyes are going to be on Georgia in the next few weeks, and we appreciate what you and all the New Deal leaders and all the Democrats down there are doing to to get us through the finish line. I also just want to go ahead and thank the speakers who are with us today, as well as over the last 3 days. As our 10th annual conference comes to a close, I just want to take a minute to reflect on and to celebrate the incredibly special community that we've built together over the last decade. On behalf of Helen and myself and the whole New Deal team, I just want to thank our supporters, our friends, the board, for being a hugely important part of this community and this movement. Part of the magic of the New Deal is being together as thoughtful policy innovators from the public, the private, and the nonprofit sectors to solve problems. I also want to particularly thank and to shout out the state and local elected New Deal leaders who really are the heart and soul of this organization. And I want to say how very proud we are of all of you. It's been beyond exciting to see New Deal leaders rising over the last 10 years, new mayors from coast to coast, leaders winning statewide races, ascending to leadership positions in legislative chambers and into Congress. And of course, we had the first New Deal leader ever to run for president of the United States. Imagine where this group's going to be in 2 years, in 10 years from now. Equally as important, we're so proud to support you and the work you do every day, making a difference in your communities, and never more so than the rising to meet the challenges, unprecedented challenges of the last year. Each of you is an inspiration, and your public service is more important than ever. And we're just getting started. As Pete said on our opening night together, the next 10 years will be the most important in our lifetimes. How we answer the call to beat the pandemic, to address climate change, to renew democracy, and to rebuild an America that works better for everyone will set us on a course for generations to come. But I know that this group, working hand in hand with the Biden-Harris administration, is up to the task and that we will meet this moment. So thank you. Thank you for joining us for the 2020 conference. We're looking forward to being together next year as soon as possible and as often as possible in person. And here's to a great 2021. Thank you all.